Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here, also known as the 90s Film Guru. And as for those who are new to the channel, I've revamped myself and rebranded, so now I'll be really focusing on the 90s. That'll be starting from 1989 and going to 2000. And I'll be looking at movies in between and TV shows as well, and looking at comparisons between novels and their movie adaptations, as well as doing top 10s of each year, and also top 10 horror films and top 10 romantic comedies, because they're my sort of favourite genres and I know them well. So today I'll be looking at The Shadow. Now this film I really loved when I was a kid. I saw it at the cinema and drew a lot from it. It is very Batman-esque, which I really loved, especially at the time. And I've always really enjoyed this film. But as I've gotten older, I've have a real appreciation for this film. I guess it's a sort of nostalgic return to teenager years or childhood, and I kind of really loved that. And this film has always had an impact on me, and I continuously watch it from time to time. Yes, as I've gotten older and watched more films, I can see that the visual effects are a little dated, but I kind of love that. I love that era that the film was made in. Even though it was made in the 90s, it's kind of set in the 30s because that's when the comic book was set. I really love that. I love that it's shot on a soundstage, Warner Brothers soundstage at the time, and that it sort of has matte paintings and a variety of other ways of doing sort of visual effects at the time, which I love. Like I mentioned, this came out in '94. It was based on a Walter Gibbons comic strip that ultimately became a comic book known as The Shadow. And it was one of the inspirations that Bob Kane had to create Batman. And you can really see that. The film really feels like Batman 1989 as well. Doesn't have the same style or flair that Tim Burton brings to that particular film, but it does feel of that period, and it is sort of similar, a masked vigilante punishing the wicked, which I really liked. Even though he doesn't have such a tragic backstory like Bruce Wayne Batman does, it's still really great, and I can see the connection between the two. Unfortunately, this film was a flop when it came out. It was made for $40 million, and only it made $48 million, which is really not that much at all. It covered its costs a little bit, but didn't really make much money. But it's a film that, in many ways, has become a cult classic. And there are a lot of films, especially in the 90s, that came out that didn't do real well, but are now considered cult classics because of the type of movies they were, and this definitely fits into that. So the director was Australian, Russell, who went on to do some really great movies and a variety of TV shows, and I really love the way he does action. I think he's really the perfect choice for this particular film, and I think he does really well. Yes, there are some visual effects, especially this particular knife that comes to life that doesn't look quite right. But everything else he does really feels of that period and takes advantage of the practical and visual effects that they used to use in that particular day. And one piece of information I found reading about this film, the backlot suffered an earthquake that shattered this house of mirrors, which is a sequence that happens towards the end of the film, and they had to rebuild that. But besides that, it really was a sort of fun production that you don't get to see backlot films anymore. And because of that, it really made it feel like it was a film that came out in the 1930s. And I loved that, and everything added to that. The look of it, the feel, the dialogue, the acting, everything, even like what they used to do is to have a shot of a plaque or something explaining where they're going, so we know as an audience member with that. And that's the type of stuff they used to do in those particular days, and I loved that. Another thing I found out about when I was researching this film is Warner Brothers got the rights in 1982, and Robert Zemeckis was heavily involved, but ultimately stepped away. Even Sam Raimi came in with a concept and an idea that was ignored by Warner Brothers. So he took that and went and made Darkman. Now Darkman is another great, fun, entertaining, over-the-top 90s sort of superhero film with a bit of an anti-hero. And I kind of can see what he wanted to do with The Shadow, and it would have been interesting if he did it, but then we wouldn't have had Darkman, so I'm kind of glad it worked out that way. So in the comics, from what I read, The Shadow has a variety of aliases, and this one's focusing on one particular alias, Lamont Cranston, played by Alec Baldwin, who does a solid job in the role. He's a rich man who is a sort of playboy by day and a masked vigilante by night, where he punishes the wicked. His past comes back to haunt him, and that ultimately becomes his adversary in the movie. I would just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the acting and the cast. I think everybody does a solid job. There's some really great performances by actors you wouldn't usually see in a movie like this, like Ian McKellen. He plays sort of an absent-minded professor who's manipulated by the villain to build a bomb to sort of destroy and to try and allow him to take over the city. And I kind of like that. Ian McKellen does so well with it. He's sort of weird and quirky, and his choices are interesting, and just his idea of how to play a character like that was really fun to watch. Tim Curry was great in it, playing Farley Claymore, this sort of Weasley kind of character who's trying to encroach in on Ian McKellen's character's projects and trying to control, and he sort of throws himself all over Reinhardt Lane, played by Ian McKellen's daughter. Just makes for a fun Weasley character that Tim Curry does really, really well. Peter Boyle makes an appearance as sort of the Shadow's right-hand man. He drives a taxi. He's really good in it as well. And Jonathan Winters, you know, really known comedian. I don't only know if his portrayal of the sort of police chief really works, but he does try to have fun with it, and he does throw in some great comical lines and some great improv, and I kind of like him in it, even though he doesn't quite work for the film. Now, Alec Baldwin plays the lead, plays the Shadow, and to begin with, I thought he was a bit over the top. It really felt like he was there's a bit of an ego there, and also, look at me, I'm in a comic book movie, so I'm going to act accordingly. And I just feel like you didn't need to do that. You could have simply just played it normal and not tried to think of the fact that you're in a comic book movie. But his performance does get better, especially later in the film. He's really great as a Shadow, works really well with the type of person he is and the portrayal of that character. And Lamont becomes a much more interesting character as the film goes along. And you really kind of care for him, and you like him a lot, and I enjoyed his performance after a while. But by far my favourite performance is by Penelope Ann Miller. She's fantastic in this movie. She plays Margot Lane, Ian McKellen's character's daughter, and she's fantastic. She really feels like she's from that period. She could have really appeared. She feels like a lot of the starlets from the 1930s, and she really feels like Jean Harlow in a lot of ways. She understands the assignment, and she plays to that, and she's so great. She's funny and interesting. She even saves the Shadow at one point, and she really feels part of that world. And she steals every scene she's in just a simple way of whether being comical or interesting or just very strong. There's something really great about her performance that really blew me away. That's what I think made Alec Baldwin's performance a little better, because when they're together, she sort of weighs him out, and he plays to the way she plays the particular character and plays within the film. And she's absolutely astonishing, wonderful to watch, and she's a highlight for me, and I think she's fantastic. I don't really know why Penelope Ann Miller wasn't bigger than she was, because she really had those old school looks, and she was a great actress. So what I drew from these particular films, this and a lot of other superhero movies from the 90s, they all had a very similar formula. They were more focused on being silly or over the top or comical than they were being dramatic. And that's something that Marvel would do later, but they sort of took that concept as well. And they would balance the dramatic element with more of the humor. And that would make for a much more interesting and a bit more in-depth superhero film. Where these early ones with this, Darkman, Rocketeer, The Phantom, they all kind of copied the same sort of formula. And I think that's partly why they didn't quite work. But also the fact, and the other reason why I don't think they worked or were as popular at the time, was because comic book movies, like the way that the formula they had for them, were looked at as kind of silly or dumb or not real or true movies. And I think that's why they really suffered in this time. But as we've seen, now we're saturated with them. So these films were really ahead of their time, even though they were developed, superhero movies were developed much better as we got in recent years, especially with Marvel and what they did with those characters and DC. So it's kind of, these films are really ahead of their time. Like I mentioned, while this film is really great, the visual effects are dated, but they still work for the type of film that they're going for. Especially, one of my favourite sequences in the film, and that kind of makes me laugh a little bit, is the start sequence. We open up, after we were introduced to Lamont and who he is and where he came from. Then we're transported to New York, I'm pretty sure, well, to a city anyway, where we see gangsters on the bridge and they're about to throw this guy over into the water who has concrete shoes on, and the Shadow appears. And why he's taunting them and ultimately saves this guy, you can see that the bridge is just one section. At either end there's like either a wooden thing at the end, or a sort of sheet that sort of looks like that the bridge goes on and the city lights and stuff. And I really love this. It does make me laugh, but I really love that sort of old school feel and the way they used to do visual effects like that they don't do anymore. That we're all digital now and it would look crap. Yes, it does look a little silly and dated, but I still love that. And these aspects of practical effects are some of my favorite effects in cinema. These films are very, like I said, very nostalgic for me, especially this one, growing up and wanting to kind of escape, and the idea of a hero and the idea that this sort of looks at morals. What makes a villain? What makes a hero? What choices affect the people and how they can go either way? And how the Shadow himself isn't quite the good guy. He's more of an anti-hero, but he's not a real bad guy either. He just wants to shift the scales for justice, like Batman would. And that's kind of what I really draw from it. And I learn a lot about what it is to be a very moral person by these particular films, especially this one. It's definitely a film of its period, but I love it. I love it so much, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it and you like sort of early superhero films. This is definitely one for you. I'm going to give The Shadow 4 out of 5. I think this film's great, entertaining. I do recommend it if you like early superhero films or something a bit different. And also, if you're a big fan of the 90s sort of movies, this is definitely worth checking out. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe at the bottom and find me on Facebook and Letterboxd. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.